When you see a shot like this, whose gaze do you think it's designed for? Men or women? Well, what about this shot? Black Widow, who's traditionally portrayed as a sexy side character in the Avengers series, has recently got her own movie. Her portrayal in the two films has radically changed. In the Avengers, she was portrayed to be sexy for the male gaze. Many of her shots focused around her physical attributes, and her dialogue was centered around other male characters.
You can't pull me out of this right now.
Natasha. Barton's been compromised.
However, in her recent movie, director Kate Shortland wanted us to see her as a multifaceted human being and for us to learn what makes her her. If you look through movies since the beginning of cinema, what you'll find are other female characters being portrayed the same way as Natasha Romanoff in the Avengers. But why is that? Can portraying women this way be potentially problematic? And why are directors actively moving away from this antiquated way of representing women? Watch the rest of the video to find out. Laura Mulvey, a feminist film theorist, first wrote about the male gaze in 1975 in her essay titled Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which exposed the sexualization and misogyny of females in film. She explains that the white heterosexual male viewer is the main targeted audience, and because of this, their needs are met first. Mulvey explains that females are the bearer of meaning, not the maker of meaning they have no relevance to the scene other than to be observed. Lecturer in Screen Studies Dr. Janice Lorek explains.
Classical Hollywood film is constructed in a way that supports or serves the repressed psychic needs of a presumed male spectator, particularly his repressed fear of women and need to feel empowered over women.
The male gaze also consists of the woman being in the scene for one purpose, for the male, both the character and the viewer. The female character is also merely seen as an object. She is there to empower the man and to make sure his masculinity shines through.
We're talking about a way of representing women that has been around before cinema even came along. It was present in oil painting, for example. Therefore, I think it's going to take a long time.
The ideology of the male gaze is still being used in films made today. Coming back to Black Widow in the Avengers, when we have a scene with Natasha in it, she is never in a scene by herself. This brings us back to the idea of the female character's only purpose is to empower the man. In scenes, she is usually with Captain America, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and Banner, to name a few. In the off chance that she is in a scene with another woman, their conversation will usually revolve around a man, not their own stories. Furthering Mulvey's insight, we see that in many instances in the film, she serves no purpose other than to be observed. Moving on to some more obvious examples of the male gaze in film, a prominent example is in Michael Bay's Transformers through the character Mikaela. Her character once again is only to be featured for her to be looked at as, and she serves no purpose in the film other than to empower the man. This being the main character Sam. At the start of the film, Sam likes Mikaela, but feels as though he cannot date her because she is above his standards. Mikaela and Sam eventually start to date, but her role in the film is only to be the damsel in distress, and to empower Sam's character. She serves no purpose apart from this. She has a look of sexiness in multiple scenes that she is in. In particular, when she is fixing Sam's car, she is leaning over the hood, and we can see the purpose of this scene through the reaction from Sam. Mulvey writes that all too often, female bodies are shown to be objects designed to please men and to conform to mainstream ideals of femininity. Mikaela's character is a prime example of what Mulvey explains. The next example is through the Bond girls in the James Bond series. The James Bond series is notoriously known for how it depicts women. From its first film in 1962, Dr. No, way up until its most recent release in 2015, Spectre. In 2012 Skyfall, the character Severine confides in Bond about being a victim of sex trafficking, clearly indicating that she is vulnerable and mistrusting around men.
You know nothing about it.
I know when a woman is afraid and pretending not to be.
Soon after this, she is showering, and Bond watches her, then decides to join her, clearly disregarding what she had just told him moments before and using her for his own pleasure. Later on, the villain of the movie has Severine tied up with a glass of scotch on her head. The villain then shoots her. Bond then states that,
It's a waste of good scotch.
implying that she was merely an object of pleasure to him, and that her life was worth less than a glass of alcohol. Mulvey's film theory is once again clear through these movies. as the point of these characters is to empower the man and to objectify the woman to the man's pleasure. A movie is made 3 times. It's made when it's written, it's made in production, and it's made again in post. What we see when we watch a film is the end result of production. There are many steps to end up with this result, meaning that there were many steps that ended up with this characterization of the female and the male gaze. Script writing is the first test. The Bechdel test can be applied here. This test, whether in a scene when 2 women are speaking, if it revolves around a man or has a man involved. If it does, then it has failed the test. This can be one way in which filmmakers can determine if the male gaze is a prominent aspect in their film. We can then move on to production. The way that framing, lighting, and directing is set up can end up producing the woman to be set up in a way that is disempowering and objectifying. The last step is the editing of the film, which can hold more power than we think.
Cinema tells us what to look at and forces us to look in that way. And so editing and camera work is tremendously important in choreographing how we look at a film and how we understand it visually.
From how we see females depicted in film through the male gaze, you'd think there'll be some implications from it. Although there is no concrete proof, the way that females are treated in film could be implemented in real life through their relationships and the way that they are seen by men.
It's hard to feel that if you get these repeated representations over and over and they're normalized, it's hard not to imagine that they might have some impact, particularly if the audiences watching it aren't necessarily trained or aware or conscious of how they're being addressed by the film.
Not only does the male gaze affect women off-screen in their day-to-day lives, but it can also have a powerful effect on how women in the film industry get their jobs. For example, is there a certain criteria they have to hit to get the job? Do they have to dress, look, and act a certain way? When other consequences because of the male gaze, it implies that there are certain films that are only made for the male viewer to see, to depict a woman in a certain light so it appeases the male audience. Because of this, it has become a normality, and we still see films that feature this portrayal of women. The theory and the ideology of the male gaze has been prominent in films for years, but some directors are starting to break away from it. Coming back to Natasha in Shortland's Black Widow, she has broken the character away from the stereotypical shots of her walking past the camera in her skin-tight suit to show off her figure, but moving towards seeing her emotions, her link to family, and her past trauma. Instead of in past movies making her feel guilty about the fact that she can't have children, Shortland makes a point of showing the anger and the fact that she did not have a choice in the matter. The costuming design in the film also plays a part in this. Instead of the tight suit, Natasha is in a suit that does not cling to her like a second skin. It has functionality. We are not told to look at her the way that we are implied to during the Avengers. In Black Widow, we are able to appreciate her for her and not for her body.
I also think it's about who gets invited to make films and who's considered important enough to tell these stories, and what kind of stories get told will influence how women are represented too. So I think we need to be willing to watch all different types of movies that will represent women in lots of different ways, and also advocate for women and indeed a whole diversity of people to be involved in making films, because I really do believe that the people who make the films will have a very large impact on what the end result is.
We need to start questioning the films we see. We need to ask ourselves if we are okay with the way that the female was portrayed in that film, and if it can relate to real life. We have seen too many films in which we are okay with the way that the female was represented. There is a need for change in this industry, actual, meaningful change. We cannot ask and wait for it to happen. We ourselves need to demand that the change be made. We need to move from Black Widow in the Avengers to Natasha in Black Widow. So, the next time you watch a movie, ask yourself if you're happy with the way that the female was displayed in that movie. Are they a multi-dimensional human being, or merely objects designed for the male gaze? So put in the comments which films you thought did a good or bad job at portraying women. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more content like this. And special thanks to Dr. Janice Lorek for her contribution to this video.